Welcome, and I hope you're well and on a good connection. I propose to talk for a little over 30 minutes and share some perspectives and insights from the work that I do with senior teams and answer any questions that you may have. What I have to say falls into two parts. The first is to share an approach to profiling the dynamics of senior teams and highlight how different leadership systems impact how a business can scale and directly impact enterprise value. Excuse me. And part two is what to do about getting on track and highlight some of the disciplines that keep you there. So to manage flow, I'm proposing to run with two Q&A sessions, one after the first part and the second towards the end. And as this is being streamed over multiple platforms and functionality is inevitably different, please use the channels that you have available to you, whatever form they may take, the chat channels, and they should come together and arrive with me as one feed. However, in the event that that fails, I've also included my email address at the bottom of each slide, so that if a thought or an idea comes to mind that you'd like clarifying or a question you want to ask, you can also send me a short email either during the course of this webinar or afterwards, as the case may be. Anyway, as always, fingers crossed that the tech works, and I have to say I've had my battles with it of late. So just very briefly, a few very quick words about me for those who don't know me and why I've become so focused on the subject of senior leadership teams. I started my career working as an analyst in a chairman's office in what turned out to be one of the country's biggest family firms at the time. And I spent my days inside spreadsheets analysing mergers and acquisitions. I really enjoyed the work, but what caught my attention was what the numbers didn't explain. And ultimately, what really informed go and no-go investment decisions. Put simply, on paper, many businesses looked remarkably similar, yet the reality was that their valuations were wildly different, and I really wanted to understand why. And that question has kind of shaped the career that followed. And I moved into roles focused on how organizations actually work day to day, how decisions get made, how senior teams operate, and why some businesses consistently deliver whilst others stall, despite having good strategies and very capable people. The real light bulb moment came for me during the work I did with turnarounds. And there was one in particular, which was a biotech business, which was in crisis. What changed performance was not strategy. It was redesigning the senior leadership team, the focus of its work, how it worked together, and particularly how it faced into the business. As the leadership system changed, the business scaled from 3.5 million to over 35 million in under 3 years. That experience fundamentally shaped the work that I do today and informs what I wrote about in my book, Lighting the Blue Touch Paper, which launched late last year. It enjoyed a very successful launch, in fact, just before Christmas 25, and became a #1 bestseller, and is now reviewing very nicely on Amazon with multiple 5-star reviews, which consistently point to how grounded and practical the content is. Today, I work with business leaders to design and coach senior teams which investors trust and that businesses can scale behind in order to maximize enterprise value when they exit. It's my experience that leadership isn't about individual heroes. It's about the leadership system. Managers work in the system that's applied, and leaders work on the system designed. And when that system's designed well, everything, and I mean everything, lifts. So that's a little about me and certainly the philosophy that I espouse. But I'd like to start today by sharing a simple home truth, or sometimes what's referred to as a blinding flash of the obvious that applies to all businesses. And it's quite straightforward, really. If you want to change the direction and the trajectory of a business, there's no more powerful lever to do so than the senior leadership team. It's not strategy decks, it's certainly not technology, and it's absolutely not organization charts. The senior leadership team sets strategy, shapes how decisions are made, how priorities are set, and how energy flows through the organization. Make no mistake, SLT's behavior sets the tone for culture, trust, and performance. Yet, in many businesses, the SLT is the least examined, least challenged, and least intentionally designed part of an organization. Quite simply, the mistake that's made is it's assumed that once roles are defined, titles are assigned, reporting lines are mapped out, that the act of leadership will take care of itself. The reality is structure creates positions and not behaviors. So as a consequence, the SLT exists on paper, but how it actually operates, makes decisions, manages challenges and internal conflicts, takes or delegates accountability, operates accepted norms of behavior, and sets overall direction are left implicit, assumed, and ambiguous. So today's webinar is how to address all that and to outline some key factors for success behind a high-performing SLT, which acts as a genuine force multiplier. Because when a high-performing senior team knows itself and is aligned, clarity cascades. And the SLT that assumed responsibility for its collective work output operates a management execution system where the decisions made stick. And because a shared language and ways of working exist in multiple conversations, trade-offs are understood and the organization moves with confidence. By contrast, when the senior team's unclear of its identity and its purpose and or is misaligned, then confusion just spreads. Messages fragment, execution slows, lines are drawn, and hey, politics fills the gaps. We all know this. It's not an abstract new idea. It shows up every day in how fast work moves, how confident people feel, and how willing they are to speak up, take ownership, and act with responsibility. Before we jump into the nuts and bolts of transforming the performance of an SLT, I'd like to take a moment to share a common condition which affects all of us, where we all think we perform better than we do in reality. To illustrate what I'm talking about, I'll introduce you to a gentleman called John Cannell, who completed his work in the US education sector back in 1987. And in his research, he asked a number of questions. By way of example, he would ask things like how students rate their ability to get on with other people, other students. And over 70% of students rated themselves in the top 10%. Interestingly, 94% of university professors say they're doing a better job than their average colleague. And so it goes on. Everybody believing they're performing better than they really are in practice. Our illusions of superiority are so widespread that the psychologists have named it the Lake Wobegon effect, which is taken from a radio show by Garrison Keillor featuring a fictional town of Lake Wobegon, where all women are strong, all men are good looking, and all the children are above average. Dare I say that in senior leadership teams, the same logic quietly applies. Ask an individual director how effective the senior leadership team is, and their first answer runs along the lines of fine, just fine. As if there's no skeletons here, nothing to find. Better than most. You might get a not perfect, but we are performing. And yet the evidence tells us a different story. Decisions are slow, endlessly revisited, accountability is blurred, functional priorities trump enterprise outcomes, strategy drifts between meetings, and the CEO or founder carries way more weight than the system can sustain. During the first quarter of 25, when I was doing research for the book that I was writing, Lighting the Blue Touch Paper, I was struck by the lack of readily available statistics and evidence-based insight on how well senior leadership teams perform. However, two in particular stand out for me. The first was by a very thorough study done by McKinsey, which highlighted that 8% of senior executives think that their senior leadership team is effective. That means 92% don't, right? A vast majority. And over 50% of executive teams are unclear on how their collective work adds value to the business. That was from the Center for Creative Leadership. And these results are also backed up by other research studies provided by the likes of Gartner and Deloitte. And what I would say is that the Lake Wobegon effect is not arrogance. It's simply a blind spot. Most senior teams are assessed from the inside by the people who helped design or inherit the system that they operate within. And they benchmark themselves against effort, intention, and activity, and not against outcomes, pace, or enterprise value creation. And that creates a really dangerous gap. The team comes to believe it's operating in a higher level than it actually is. And underperformance becomes normalized because no one thinks that they're a problem. And this is why I often say senior leadership teams are rarely underperforming because of talent. They're underperforming because they're actually under-designed. And until a team explicitly defines what good looks like at an enterprise level, clarifies decision rights, roles, rhythms, and benchmarks itself against observable behaviors and outcomes, and invites an external mirror rather than only hear an internal echo, it will continue to believe it's above average, whilst value quietly leaks out of the business. So, to support that bold assertion, let's just take a moment to examine how leadership causes value to leak away in a business. Invariably, when I start my work with senior leadership teams, I see the same patterns. I see functional optimization over enterprise outcomes. I see slow circular decisions that come back again and again. I see meetings that generate activity but no ownership. The CEO or founder becomes the escalation point, and the strategy is discussed, but it's not translated into action, and conflict is either avoided or played out politically. None of this feels especially dramatic in isolation. It just feels normal, the way it is. And that's precisely the problem. Now, here's the patterns that live beneath the surface of what I've just described. It's rework, duplication, second guessing, delayed decisions that compound across the organization, executive time consumed in arbitration rather than direction, defensive behaviors instead of commercial risk taking, talent becoming frustrated in the layers below, and investor skepticism about execution reliability. All of this is often referred to as the work that we do. Sometimes that's expressed with a victim mindset. Whatever, it doesn't show up on a P&L, but the costs to the business are absolutely present. And over time, those hidden costs surface as visible consequences. Missed quarters, margin compression, lower valuation multiples, slower scaling and revenue growth, founder dependency risk, increased operational friction, cultural fatigue. At this point, many boards call the pattern that they see in the business performance drift. Investors call it execution risk. I tell you what, acquirers call it discount. None of what I'm talking about starts in the middle of the organization. It starts at the top, which is why this webinar is called The Fish Rots from the Head. So when the senior leadership team is not deliberately designed as an integrated leadership system with clear authority, ownership, operating cadence, and behavioral guardrails, the business leaks value. And every year it won't be 20%, it won't be 10%, but quietly. A de-scoped, delayed project here, hesitation over decisions which are revisited over there, friction between teams. Adding it all up, it very often, when we do an audit on these things, it comes into the range of 3 to 5% of net margin performance. Now, in a £20 million business, that's 600k million pounds. In a £75 million business, well, it's over £2 million. You know, big numbers. And here's the irony. The biggest improvement opportunity in most scaling businesses is not a new strategy. The opportunity is sitting right under the senior leadership team's nose. It's the senior leadership team itself. And the solution lies in how the SLT is designed as an enterprise leadership system. Because when you remove friction at the top, believe me, the whole business just accelerates. And I've seen this time and time again. So one of the first things to understand is the dynamics of a senior leadership team and the different forms that it can take. Now, I encourage you to take a screen grab or a photograph of what's up on screen right now, and we'll refer back to it later. But by way of a quick explanation, this table summarizes 5 broad types of senior leadership team and sets out how they operate, behave, and perform. It's structured like a maturity grid that ranges from innocence to excellence. And, well, let's just take a moment to walk through it to help characterize each broad type of the 5 presented here. So far left, I think as you would be looking at it, sits the support team, best characterized by a strong single central figure where decisions bottleneck at the very top. The single spider on the web, if you will, where meetings focus on updates and firefighting, and blame and excuses dominate. The business is totally dependent on one person, perhaps 2, but very few, 1 or 2 individuals, and consequently it's very fragile as a result. Next along is the advisory team, where there's the discussion, lots of it, but little progressive development of it. The dynamic is participation without accountability. Polite talk replaces traction. Unfortunately, learned helplessness becomes the norm as decision-making authority remains still with one person. It feels collaborative, but nothing really happens. It's a talking shop. And to be clear and very blunt, the MD CEO is not getting the best from what her people can contribute. Moving along, we see a functional team. This is really quite common, particularly in larger organizations with, quotes, more mature senior leadership teams, where each leader is driven to optimize their own area. There's some coordination, but there's really actually quite weak alignment. It tends to be quite short-term, tactical in focus, and culture tends to be shaped by compliance rather than ownership. And silos are very common, they just persist. And again, being blunt, this group is often made up of talented, experienced people. It kind of tortures the word team. Indeed, this is one of the more frequent mistakes I and many others see in operation, which is to equate functional strength and excellence with enterprise cohesion and performance. It's quite the opposite. Further along are collaborative teams, more typically on a good to great journey of their own, having probably read, digested and applied things like Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctional of a Team. They'll have some clear norms. They'll have some defined decision rights, and constructive challenge is being encouraged. It's almost expected. And alignment begins to drive both strategy and culture. There are, however, some blanks, there's some holes, and the organization, despite that, feels more joined up, and the mood is very much a work in progress. It's going somewhere, it's doing the right sort of things, it's just not building the infrastructure nearly fast enough as far as leadership system design is concerned. Far right, the enterprise leadership team, where radical candor, Kim Scott, robust debate, it doesn't leave bruises on people. It's in full flow, constructive conflict is the order of the day. Strong, capable people holding roles in a senior leadership team. But the key point is that leadership is distributed down through the firm as leaders are absolutely intent on developing leaders, where decisions are taken closest to the action. So this is really a senior leadership team really thinking and applying how it faces into the business, and what it expects to see is operating standards, decisions taken closest to the action. And when you have a leadership system in place like this, growth really does become self-sustaining. And I tell you what, investors see far less risk, and this is where they may actually pay a premium, depending on how you've structured the sales process. As mentioned before, senior leadership behavior ripples through the organization. And again, you may want to take a screen grab here, and we can refer back to it later. It shapes how decisions are made, how people behave, and how fast values created, which leads to the question, how intentionally have you designed your SLT to turn leadership operating as a system into value? Investors, buyers, and acquirers don't just look at numbers when they look at a business. They take a particularly close look at how a leadership works, because leadership quality determines execution risk, and there's always a price to be paid on execution risk. And hopefully you can see from this visual, busy as it is, the influence of the SLT and how it can act as a force multiplier, leveraging the leadership behavior it promotes. By intentionally moving to the right, you increase the impact of turning leadership into value. Now, you could look at all of this and you could quickly say, you know what, I recognize us somewhere on there, in terms of a profile, in terms of a broad type of SLT. And I'd say to you, that's really very easy. That's the really easy part. The hard part is being honest about where you really sit. And when you're with the team, up to your eyes with all that needs to be done, it's very difficult to actually see your own blind spots. People avoid awkward conversations. They inevitably protect their own patch, or assume everyone else sees things the same way. And this is where I've got to say, this is where an external facilitator armed with some diagnostics and measurement tools helps. They don't have history, status, or politics to manage. The job is simply to hold up a mirror, ask the questions the team would normally dodge. And without that independent challenge, the spectrums that I'm sharing are really just purely descriptive. But by embracing the challenge, the spectrums and the implications that they highlight move from being purely diagnostic and become developmental. Now, here's the thing. All too often, everything that I'm saying about the realities of an underperforming senior team is realized way too late. And usually after a business has entered a sales process. As I progressed my research on my book during the course of last year, I had several conversations with both sellers and buyers that particularly focused on how senior teams are reviewed and critically how they're valued. So going back to the SLT spectrum, let's consider how it all translates into value, particularly when it comes to the business end of how evaluation is arrived at. On the left-hand side of this spectrum, businesses routinely attract discounts of up to 30%. On the right-hand side, genuinely led enterprise teams can command premiums of 10, 20%. The difference isn't intent, it's behavior. Yeah. When it comes down to how much money finds its way into your pocket or the pockets of shareholders, what steps the CLT takes to maximize enterprise value makes a huge difference. The quality of performance of your senior team directly impacts the price others will pay for the business. So I'll just take a short pause there for breath and see if any questions have come in through chat. And I don't see anything there, so let me just quickly check email and give that a moment to refresh. Nothing there, so let me just crack on. But just by way of explanation, I mean this blue line, sorry, I should probably have explained. This blue line is typically the multiple that's attributed to the business, the enterprise price, if you will. So 4-6 times EBITDA. However, as due diligence progresses, particularly in the later advanced stages, and particularly where you get to the business end of the negotiation, this is where the discounts come onto the table. And they're of this kind of size and scale. So if you're thinking about an exit, it's best to be aware of this a couple of years out so that you can really begin to do something about it, preferably even longer. So there's definitely benefits to be gained in year, but it certainly crystallizes at a sale. That's when it becomes real in terms of measurement. So where was I? At the beginning I was saying that SLTs matter, and that usually, dare I say, provokes a bit of a yawn. As everyone nods along because it's such a blinding flash of the obvious. But it very often becomes an uncomfortable truth. There's a well-documented leadership paradox that the teams most confident in their effectiveness are often the least accurate in their self-assessment. A confidence capability gap is very common and easy to spot in others, but less frequently does leadership see it in themselves. And at the risk of being indelicate, most leadership teams are very good at holding others to account, whether that be functions, departments, project delivery teams. There's usually no shortage of KPIs to inform judgment. But senior teams are far less disciplined at asking one simple question, like how effective are we collectively at fulfilling our role. Uniquely, there's an absence of data, and so blind spots become very widespread. Um, One example of how this blind spot develops is because challenging peers of equal status can feel impolite, if not downright awkward, or conflict is just avoided as calling out underperformance comes off as being political. And so drift creeps in and is tolerated and becomes the norm. And that's my key point, that SLT underperformance rarely shows up as a crisis. It shows up as drift. And as we've seen, that drift ultimately carries a heavy price at sale and may even be costing you as much as 3-5% net trading margin prior to that every year. And you don't see it because you simply don't measure SLT performance. So what's to be done? And this is where I start my work invariably with the operating system canvas. It's a single page framework that defines how the senior team leads, how it decides, how it communicates, how it executes. And it connects intent to impact through behaviors, rhythms, and practices. And to that end, the power of the OS canvas is not what it adds. It's actually much more about what it removes, which is misunderstanding in the form of politics that occurs after meetings, the relitigation of decisions which are taken in the room, and in particular ambiguity and hidden assumptions. It surfaces all of that. So the OS canvas works to create clarity on decision making, authority, behaviors, energy flow, and how leadership is visible and experienced by others. The next step is measuring how leadership is practiced, developing your own senior leadership team performance dashboard that allows teams to see, are we actually doing the right things? And are we doing them well? It turns what is instinct into evidence. And that matters because leadership teams are often opinion rich and evidence poor. The dashboard that you create forces prioritization. It surfaces what really matters and what does not. A dashboard takes some effort to design because it deliberately brings together three different types of data. The first is measuring how the team thinks and feels it is operating and tracking that over time. That's qualitative, but it's the human reality of leadership. It's a key component. The second is leading indicators that show whether the right things are happening day to day. And the third is the lagging results that confirm whether those efforts are actually paying off. And what the dashboard usually reveals isn't failure, but it's unfinished work, which in itself is very often an important mind shift to make. That shift becomes real when data is reviewed regularly and conversations become more focused, progress becomes more visible, and small improvements compound. Over time, rhythm creates a healthy momentum and turns leadership improvement into a continuous, shared discipline rather than what is more often the case, a one-off initiative. When I wrote the Lighting the Blue Touch paper, I talk about 6 ingredients that show up again and again in leadership teams that really, really work. I'm not going to labor it, but the mix is what makes the difference. So having clear ways of working built on genuine, real human connection. People have taken time to get to know each other and build psychological safety and trust between themselves. They share goals that give people a common purpose, in terms of what they're shooting for. Roles are understood and fit together inside a really simple operating framework. That there are plans that link strategy to what actually gets done, and a steady rhythm of execution that makes that visible and drives follow through, all in an environment that's been created where people feel engaged, trusted, and able to think. None of that is controversial. The more interesting question is which one's missing or weaker than you'd like on your team. Most SLTs don't struggle because everything's broken. They struggle because one or two of these elements are thin, and the rest of the system is quietly working around to sort of patch the gap. So when norms are fuzzy, politics creeps in. When roles aren't clear, decisions slow down or float upwards. And when there's no execution rhythm, strategy starts to look good on slides, but goes nowhere in practice. A performance dashboard helps by providing evidence that spotlights gaps and what needs to be worked on. High-performing SLTs lead beyond their functional areas. They align around a shared purpose and give others space and confidence to act and hold themselves accountable as a group rather than individuals protecting their patch. Intentional leadership is their calling card. They practice it religiously to develop leaders within their own reporting lines so that the whole business operates as though it's on the front foot. And a well-designed dashboard makes this visible. It shows how leadership is really landing in terms of execution, speed, trust, clarity, and accountability. Once leadership can be seen, it can be improved. It stops being personal and starts being professional. And this is where it all comes together. Strong SLTs reduce execution risk by making leadership visible at multiple points in the business, increase predictability, and build investor confidence, attracting a premium at sale, and all probability, a bigger opportunity for some of the participants on a bigger stage post-sale. So leadership maturity is a genuine commercial asset, not just a nice idea. And it's also very evident when it's not there, particularly if rhetoric and management by exhortation is used to fill the void without any of the supporting processes, systems, and enabling behaviors and culture. Such posturing invariably makes what does not exist to appear more lacking than it is and backfires. So to close, and I'm very conscious of time, I sum this up with a second home truth, which is when turning leadership into value, you reap what you sow. So let me put that in another way in terms of how leadership is exercised in your organization. Leadership is often viewed as belonging to an individual, and The focus of teaching the materials on leadership development tend to focus on influence and impact and the ability to inspire others. The benefits of leadership accelerate when leadership is applied as a collective term, especially at a senior level, to secure alignment on enterprise focus. And performance really lifts off when leadership operates at a system level where everybody has a contribution to make, engage, drive results, and work on being better tomorrow, next week, next month. As spotlighted earlier, the senior team is seen as where it all comes together as the force multiplier of organizational performance. You can let your leadership team design evolve by default, shaped by habits, personalities, and whatever forces happen to be loudest at the time. Or you can step back and design it deliberately in line with what the business needs for the future and how you want it to be rather than how it's always worked. And that choice has consequences. Teams operating with heads down quietly erode value. Those pretenders working in silos burn time and energy without much beyond their function to show for it, like playing at it. High-performing teams, on the other hand, build enterprises underpinned by leadership systems that people, acquirers, are willing to pay a premium for. So the real question isn't what sort of business do you run, it's what senior leadership team are you choosing to build, and do you know the choice, what that choice is really giving you. So to close, a good starting point to address the challenges you experience is by completing a short quiz that I've developed, which I'll send to everybody on this session. The quiz, I stress, is completely free. It takes 3-4 minutes to complete. Best done honestly and candidly, so you don't kid yourself like woebegone, and often provides a clear view of where the business, the SLT, sits and why. If you answer it honestly and candidly, it will give you a practical way to talk about and plan for what needs to change. And once you've completed it, I'll send you a PDF of my book for free, which is the least that I can do to offer some practical support and advice on steps that you can take. So 2 steps here. The first only takes a few minutes. The other one takes part of a day, and both are at absolutely zero cost to you. So I sincerely encourage you to give the quiz a go and discover for yourself what can be done. And if all of that stirs up a few uncomfortable thoughts about your own or the senior team's setup and performance, and you'd like a chat, then just scan the QR code on the right and we can set up a time to speak and start a conversation. I hope the material shared is helpful to you. Let me just check again on chat if there's any questions. And there's nothing there. Let's just check if there's anything that's come in on email, but please take a note of email and fire me a question and I'll be only too happy to help, and if appropriate we can have a conversation and go wherever you want to go with it. Okay, I hope that was helpful, informative, maybe even a little bit entertaining. All right, have a good day. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.